right, Chloe. Okay, we're gonna have fun. So I'm
Yes.
gonna take you on this my own little journey. All right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. So a year ago we met, and you were really shy. I think I got more out of your brother than I did you. At that conference.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you did help me with my rainbow program.
We did. We had like our own individual presentations, but I also volunteered to help with his presentation. For part of it, he was like mixing dye into different like little jugs of water to explain all the different biblical meanings of the colors of the rainbow.
I'm flattered that you remember. That was great. And then we participated also in a Q&A.
We did.
Remember that? Yeah. All right. So I just want to start. Just give us some of your background story, if you would.
So I am a 20-year-old woman from the Central Valley of California, and I speak mainly on behalf of my experience and also, by extension, my family's experience of me going through a social and medical gender transition between the ages of 12 to 16 from a little girl, into the identity of a young man, and coming back from that and finding healing through detransition and finding Christ.
Really powerful. When was the first time that you felt that you were trapped in the wrong body or had the inclination to want to be male?
I mean, from a very young age, I had felt uncomfortable with myself to some degree. I was born with a cleft palate, so I was used to being in a medical setting, and I was later diagnosed with ADHD as well. So it just like felt like I was constantly going back and forth to the doctor's office for some different issue. And I always had this idea in my mind that I was different for some reason, not only for those medical reasons and later being diagnosed with a learning disability, but also because even from like my own peers and my own siblings, I just stood out. I was very eccentric. I started out as like a very girly girl when I was a really little kid. Actually, I loved Barbies, I loved Bratz dolls, and like getting my hands on whatever colorful toys that I could. And I loved like wearing skirts and dresses. My dad once told me that I couldn't even go out of the house when I was like six-ish if I wasn't wearing like bright colors or like a big tutu, right? I was a cute kid. I was a pretty cute kid. But I also had a bit of a tomboyish streak as well, especially the older that I got. Like around the time that I hit puberty, I just started to enjoy like the presence of my older brothers and the boys at school more than I did like being with my sisters or being with the girls around me. And it started to feel as though like for some reason, this was something that made me weird. Like I didn't know why, but it just felt like I would never be able to connect with other women as a young woman. And I started to wonder, like, is me being more masculine, does that take away from who I am? Does that take away from my beauty, from my femininity? What worth do I even have as a woman if I don't want to be like the other women around me? And
what age was that?
I started to really ruminate on this around the age of like, I'd say like 10, 11, 12-ish.
So puberty, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started puberty a little bit earlier than usual, which I guess is pretty standard for today, actually. I started to develop physically at around the age of 8, maybe 9 even. And like I was going to 4th grade with a developing body, and with that came a lot of unwanted attention that was very uncomfortable and very intimidating for me. And I kind of wanted to run away from it. It was just like, on one hand, like it was like all the feelings around it were so conflicting, because on one hand, like it kind of was a confidence boost that like people were talking about me, but also it was about something that like I didn't really want to have attention for, because I was still a kid, and it was often like, it felt like a very adult thing, and it was.
Right.
And like the environment at school, socially, I had a lot of very precocious peers whose parents like would allow them to browse the internet or like watch whatever movies they want. So they knew about like a lot of like, they would often talk about like a lot of really raunchy, just not child-friendly stuff. And through them, I learned like all these unhealthy ideas about like girls and boys and human sexuality. in general. And it felt like a lot of my worth as a girl was going to come from my body, my breasts, the way that I look, and things that were all superficial. And unfortunately, I did experience sexual trauma before I had even my first kiss. And I just really wanted to run away. I really wanted to run away from all of these uncomfortable feelings and the hardships that come with being a little girl growing into a young woman.
Chloe, thank you for being so transparent. And I want to kind of interject here a little bit because they've done some studies and they found that only 3% of boys and 17% of girls have never seen pornography. And what they're finding is that
I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
I was probably like 7, 8-ish when
you were
maybe
exposed.
just a little bit older when I was first exposed to some form of it.
Right. And so the type of pornography that children are exposed to is not just naked images like what you would find in a standard magazine back in the 60s. What we're talking about is hardcore and very perverted pornography that these children are being exposed to. So it makes sense that now you're growing up in an environment that many of us don't even relate to because, most of us have been raised, where pornography was not easily acceptable or accessible. Now that it's so prevalent in our society, these kids are being exposed at younger and younger ages. But you had multiple issues going on, not only like the fact that your body's changing and you're getting attention, which is, like you said, unwanted. And then the sexual, issue that happened, which again was trauma. And then on top of that, just the disgust of hearing these kids talking about, things that children shouldn't even have been exposed to. Wow, it was creating this perfect storm for you, wasn't it?
It really was.
Okay.
I mean, I just wanted to crawl out of my own body and my own femininity. I didn't feel like I belonged in it, and I didn't feel like I felt like it put me in danger. I felt like for as long as I was feminine and a woman, I would just be in danger of bad things happening to me and constantly being a victim.
So what really kind of strikes me as odd is like, here you're diagnosed with ADHD, and I don't know if I've ever talked to anyone that was more clear and succinct about what they're talking about. Was that confirmed? Because
I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD.
Okay.
I was medicated for it when I was, I think, starting at the age of 10, maybe 11, and it didn't really work. Like sometimes, it would help me to focus. Sometimes, other times, I would just get focused on something. I would just focus on one subject or one task for hours out of the day, and then once the meds were off, I'd realize all these, I'd have all these bodily needs that I was not attending to because I was so focused. I would be really thirsty. I'd be really hungry. I'd have to use the restroom, and I would only really realize all of that after the meds wear off.
Wow.
So it served to dissociate me further from my body. And eventually I decided to just go off of it because it was they just kept raising the dosage or changing between different medications, and I hated every single one of them.
Wow. So Chloe, is it possible that even the ADHD drugs were also contributing to some of the gender issues that you're going
think
through?
indirectly, yes.
I've never even heard that mentioned. Are the
I mean, a lot
Perez's
of
still
my-
here? Because that would be interesting. We had, Dr. Perez and his wife, and it would be interesting to know the correlation if there was one.
I mean, you'll see that a lot of these kids who become confused about their gender are often on some sort of psychotropic medication. Many of them have been diagnosed with depression or bipolar or other conditions, and they're on either stimulants or antidepressants or antipsychotics. And it's something that obviously negatively impacts the cognitive functioning of adults in many ways. But for a child to grow up with that, to grow up with your emotions muted and stunted in that way, I mean, it's not hard to see why these children want to escape the way that they do.
Absolutely. I struggled also with gender dysphoria until I was 20 and thought that I should have been a girl because I felt inadequate as a male. I remember I went to 12 schools within my early education, but in eighth grade, and I was starting to go through puberty, but most of my peers were already in the throes of it. I started school first grade when I was 5. I was a small kid anyway, and I didn't know how to swim, and we had moved to this really wealthy community that had an Olympic-sized swimming pool in the school. And so all of the boys would get the swimming pool for a week, and then all the girls would get it the following week. I remember bringing my bathing suit, putting my bathing suit on. I didn't even have pubic hair at the time. And I remember going into the shower before you go into the swimming pool, and nobody's wearing a suit. And then all of a sudden, I start being teased for having a suit on. The most humiliating moment was when I had to take off my suit so that I looked like everybody else, and then here I have no pubic hair. So it just seemed like there was a lot of emasculation going on in my early development. So what was really odd is that even in that swimming pool area, we would have to do jumping jacks on the side of the pool, pair up for doing sit-ups. So it was constantly this emasculation that was going on in school that was also adding to quite the opposite of what you were going through. While you were getting unwanted attention, I was getting negative attention for being male. So again, I thought, well, if I'm inadequate as a boy, I really should be a girl. And so really, you and me are down like 2 flat tires, but just on different sides of the car, right? So tell me a little bit more, because I'm really identifying with you a lot. I think that the teenage years are so vital for affirming gender, and a lot of times what happens is kids get ridiculed, like, don't hold your hand like that, don't walk like that, sit up straight, or, boys don't cry. Whenever I heard that criticism, it only made me feel less than. It only made me feel inadequate for what I was. And what I really find valuable is that parents need to be affirming rather than judgmental or critical. And did that play a part in anything for you?
Well, you mean like my relationship with my parents in general, or how they
Sure,
responded
in your
to
family,
this?
your friends, at school?
I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and I was not particularly close to my mom and dad growing up. I was more so close with my siblings on my maternal side because I have all half siblings. And I felt this disconnect with mom and dad from a pretty young age. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised that was part of what led to my struggles with my own identity in terms of my sex, because I didn't feel particularly close with my mom, although I was a little bit closer with her than my dad. And I think that I wanted to replace that lack of closeness with my dad with my own identity as a male.
Okay. And so as you were imitating the parent that you were, closer to, that
And really
makes
all of
sense.
my male family members as well.
Okay. So you were imitating them as well. So your dad and your brothers, so you identified with
Primarily
them
my
also.
brothers, yes.
Okay. All right. What was your relationship like with your dad?
Very distant for the most part, actually. It was a little bit strained over the years. I always saw him as like the strict one, or the one who would like reprimand me for like not doing assignments, or like, I don't know if this is just like a thing for kids of today, or what your own relationship with your dad was like. But have any of you ever had that experience of like sitting down with one of your parents trying to like do like a hard math problem, and you just like end up sobbing through the whole thing? That he was the parent who I would do that with.
Okay, no, that's a perfect example, right? Right. And so you wanted his help or their help, and then unfortunately it goes south, and then it turns out to be damage rather than this great opportunity.
Yeah, so when I came to them, I often felt as a kid that when I would come to them with my own personal problems, like, I didn't really feel like they would either hear me out or even that I could confide in them, because we just didn't have that trust established.
Right.
But with the whole gender thing, it was a little bit different, because, this is something that I felt was like more closely related with what I thought was like a fundamental part of my identity. And I wanted everybody around me to treat me as a young man. So at first, I started telling people online that I was a boy, and then some people at school. I told an older sister of mine, and then eventually I wrote a letter to my mom and dad detailing these feelings that I had about a month before my 13th birthday.
And what was their response?
They wanted to show their support in a reasonable manner. They wanted to allow me to experiment with like my clothing and cut my hair shorter and whatever it would be that would make me feel comfortable, but within reason, with with reasonable boundaries. They affirmed the name, they tried to do the pronouns and calling me a boy and their son and everything, because they didn't really know the dangers of entertaining this. At the time. Like, there was very limited information on this, actually, which is crazy how much has changed, because this was like 2017.
It didn't take long.
Yeah, it didn't take very long. But they knew that this is related in part due to my social and mental health issues, as well as my learning disability. And so they wanted to get me psychological help. And so they started to have me see a therapist.
So I want to kind of unpack a little bit of what you were saying. So they were trying to kind of encourage you, thinking that maybe you'd grow out of it. Let's just humor her.
Yeah.
But then what it did is it really started, tunneling into something more.
I mean, I was already very dead set on this idea that I was a boy and that I wanted to pursue medicalization, because that was exactly what I was seeing within the transgender community online.
Oh, that's what I want to, yeah. So you're getting a lot of information online that's fueling a lot of this gender.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really truly believe that I was a boy until I actually started seeing transgender content online. And it wasn't like celebrities or influencers or anything like that. These were kids my age. Some of them were a little bit older even, who were just talking honestly about their experiences growing up, their feelings of distress. And I just felt like I related to these kids so much. Like, at first it started out as like an intellectual interest in the transgender subject, because I mean, it's especially like I was the kind of kid who was like, I had interest in medical literature, and part of that is probably that my mom's a nurse, so I would read up. I had like a lot of interest in like biology, the human body. I even had like a phase when I was a kid where I was like researching like birth defects, because I had one of my own. I had that background. And so this naturally was the next interest. And then I started to connect it with myself more and more and more, until it was like, okay, like, the reason why I feel uncomfortable as a girl is because I have the soul of a young man.
Wow.
I thought I had finally found the answer.
So in this quest, the point that I think is really relevant here is, what kind of advice would you give to parents that have children that have open access to the internet?
Well, try to avoid giving them access to the internet for as long as possible, but ideally until they're in at least their early teens, and then guide them on how to use it and see it as a tool for communication, for building connections, and also for learning, rather than just as a tool for entertainment.
Right.
And you should warn them about the dangers of the internet, of the open interaction on there, and the things that they could potentially be exposed to. Use filters, monitor their usage and who they are speaking to and interacting with on there. I don't think that children should be barred completely from using it, because it is a wonderful tool for communication and learning, but you have to balance that with their safety.
So, Chloe, you bring up a really great point, and a lot of conservative Christians, will restrict their kids from having any access to the internet, and then all of a sudden when they turn 18, it's like, woo, kid in a candy store.
We are an increasingly internet and technology focused world, and it's a skill that we all need to have to some extent, especially the next generation, as the job market, as careers are going to be more focused on the usage of internet devices.
Well, I have a family member who they told her that she would have to have a computer for her child when they were going to, the Christian school. And she really fought to have the internet in her home, but she agreed, and she got a tablet. And then when her 6-year-old child, got on the internet to access homework or whatever, reports, found internet pornography that the father had forgotten to clear his history. And so here the 6-year-old little boy was exposed to, internet porn.
I believe that was my first exposure to pornography as well, was on a school device. They started handing them out when I was in my 5th grade year, so I was 10.
10 years old, okay. And that's relatively older than some of the statistics. My first exposure to porn was 10. My mother gave me my father's
And it was in a
porn
much
magazine.
different format.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Much
right,
different.
Right. Because the pornography now that children have access to is much harder and deeper than the things that we were looking at when I was a kid. So again, our kids really definitely are exposed to a lot of things. There's a documentary called Childhood 2.0 that every parent and grandparent, I think, should see. Have you seen it?
I have not. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, it's incredible, talking about the social network and this kind of stuff. And we're finding that even little children, 10 years old, are now committing suicide because of the access to social media and the pressures that brings. So you're an example of that, Chloe. And what I like is that I can pick your brain and I can ask you any question I want and you'll answer it honestly, to kind of get that understanding, because people need to know that our children are really suffering when our parents think, oh, they're okay, it's just a Japanese cartoon, the anime and all of that. Oh, by the way, can you speak about exposure to anime and did that have
I had an early exposure to it, actually.
Okay.
And it was very innocent shows, actually. I actually, because of my older sisters, I had movies and I had movies of the show called Sailor Moon on VHS. And even to this day, it's still a comfort show for me. It's something that's very wholesome. It's about this group of girls that they become basically superheroes, and they're defending their town and the world, and it's just really cute, and it's I'd say it's a pretty good show for kids, but eventually that led me down the path to I had early internet exposure, and it was basically unfettered, so no filtering at all. And so I would look up episodes of the show, and eventually I started discovering more shows, and these shows started becoming more and more depraved, because anime is such a broad medium. And there are children's shows, but there also are a lot of teenage and adult-oriented shows. Right. And the medium is becoming increasingly filled with more adult-focused and very sexualized content. Yeah.
Daisy from South Africa was just giving a presentation on Sunday about her addiction to anime and how that really grabbed her about the lesbian culture and how that really kind of sucked her in. And then when she was confronted with her Christianity and she really defended it and was holding on to that and found herself really having to struggle with this addiction to it. So as innocent as your cartoon was, it almost seemed like it was a gateway to other things that were deeper and darker.
Unfortunately, yes.
Wow, okay. I really find this interesting, Chloe, and I'm not sure what you're going to say because I haven't, asked you these questions before, but everything that you're saying in line, whether you have Christian principles or not, you can see how they're definitely designed to change the thinking of our culture, and you were definitely affected by that. I want to ask how you got introduced to hormones, to testosterone.
So, I already had the idea of going on them in mind because medicalization was pretty much always the focus in the transgender community at the time that I entered it. It was all focused on achieving your true self through medicalization and through transitioning hormonally and physically to look more like a member of the opposite sex, to pass. And
is that a term?
Yes,
to
passing
pass.
as the yes.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And so my mom and dad were surprised, actually, that when I went to these therapy appointments, they were not allowed in the room and they were not allowed to partake in them. So, with not being followed up with even after the fact, they were getting really frustrated because they sent me to a psychologist with this expectation in mind that I was going to get better. I was going to learn how to cope through these feelings. I would be left alone until I was 18 or well into my adulthood even, and I would have more of a grip on myself and my identity and the things that I would want in my life before choosing to make any potentially permanent decisions. So mom and dad took matters into their own hands, and they spoke to the psychologists themselves, and they asked them, so why does she want to do this? And why does she want to pursue the medical aspect of this at such a young age? And what is the rush to do that? Why can't we wait until she's an adult And if we don't, if we do choose to go through with this while she's young, what do we do if she ends up regretting this as an adult? And they were told, well, the detransition and regret rate are less than 1 or 2%, so it's very unlikely. But what is likely, if you deny your child of this life-saving care, she's going to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
They started talking about the high suicide statistics within the transgender community, and they attributed it falsely to a lack of medicalization,
Mm-hmm.
to convince my mom and dad that my life would be on the line if they didn't allow me to go on these experimental treatments.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a parent and you're faced with that ultimatum of life or death by not just one medical professional, but multiple medical professionals, what wouldn't you do for your child? What wouldn't you sign off on to keep them alive and well? That's why I don't blame my mom and dad for saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't blame them for signing off
Of course not.
on any of the treatments, because they were doing the best with what little they were given by our medical professionals, who were supposed to help not only me, but also help us as a family.
So, Chloe, I want to jump in because there is a statistic about the high rates of suicide. What is it? I think it's 40% of transgender people will attempt suicide, and 31% will actually take their lives. But the suicide rate among the transgender population is highest 7 years after sex reassignment surgeries.
Yes, the further that you go into medicalization, and especially post-surgery, especially the genital kind, anything that changes or removes parts of the reproductive system, it's going to negatively impact that person more than anything.
I think the surgical complication rates are like 90 to 93%.
Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't have any sort of downstairs surgery, but my breasts were surgically removed when I was 15. And I mean, that alone has not only caused me a great deal of grief, but it's been 4 years since surgery, and I'm still dealing with complications. I'm still healing.
Yeah. I remember there was a transgender female, which is somebody that's biologically male, and they were in Austria. And somebody, I think the pastor was telling me his story. He had been married, he had children, and a common misunderstanding, I think, among people is that they think that if you're trans, you're automatically gay. And that's not the case. There are just as many heterosexual transgenders as there are homosexual transgender. So this person was heterosexual, married to a woman with children, and then he transitioned to become more female, and in the process had the top and bottom surgery. But this person was 6'4" and had extremely masculine features. And even though he had the top and bottom surgery, I remember thinking, oh, I was trans, I know how to relate to this. But when I met that individual and I saw so much pain, and they shared with me that they had chronic pain down there because of the complications of the surgery, that chronically they were always in pain. And I realized that there was nothing that I could say that was going to make a difference. And what God impressed me to do is to just sit with that person and just listen. And then I had nothing to share that was going to benefit him. But what he needed is he needed to know that I was there and that I was going to listen to him.
And that's what these individuals who are struggling with this need along the way, whether they've already made the jump into transition or they're coming back out or they haven't decided to go into any medical interventions. What we need to be giving to these kids and to these men and women is our compassion, our time, our understanding, our ears and our hearts. They need to be listened to because these are people who are struggling. Many of them, I mean, there are a few commonalities that I see amongst people who identify with the transgender community. Many of them are like me. They're either somewhere on the autistic spectrum or they have another learning disability such as ADHD. Oftentimes, they'd have experienced a trauma in their life that was either sexual in nature, especially early in their childhood, or they have been abused or neglected by their parents, or they have some other sort of familial issue. That is what these people are dealing with at their core. The issue is not their bodies, it's not their gender, it's not the way that they were born. It's these other compounding traumas and issues in their lives that their medical providers are doing them a disservice by not focusing on first. Unfortunately, it's up to us to listen to these people, to help them, to give them the care that they need. That's all it takes.
So, Chloe, I want to talk about your parents for just a minute, because I hear this story all the time about parents that will say, oh, my child said that they were experiencing same-sex attraction or transgender ideation, and so I took them to a therapist, or even they'll say, I took them to a Christian therapist, and yet the therapist was actually affirming, and the parents had absolutely no idea about that.
Yes, it was all affirmative for me. There was no questioning of the identity.
Were your parents under the assumption that this therapist was actually going to help you to identify with your biology?
I mean, they were more so under the assumption that they would just take like a non-interventionalist route. Mm-hmm. And they weren't really sure exactly what care for me would really look like, because they were so uncertain about what this whole thing would actually entail.
Do you think that they were aware that the community is so affirming?
No, not at all.
All right.
I mean, we have like gay and bisexual and lesbian family, but they had never dealt with anything in relation to this topic in particular. And they are two very different things.
So this is really odd, and it just occurred to me, is it possible that the parents are also being victimized by a lack of information and transparency about what the psychological environment is designing to do to their children?
I think that my mom and dad were just as much victims as I was.
Can you talk about that for just a moment?
Right. I mean, I was the one who actually went through the course of all the interventions and had like the bodily harm done to me and the psychological harm, the developmental harm. But mom and dad went through that with me.
Wow.
I was not alone.
Wow. Okay.
They watched their own child be ripped away from them before their eyes. Everybody in the family watched the light slowly leave my eyes over the years as I turned into a shell of the little girl who I was. And it hurt everybody. It hurt all of us. My family has not been the same, and we're still recovering from this. Wow. And there is like a lot of unspoken tension and grief, and it's changed us. It's left a long-lasting change on us.
Chloe, I think that's the first time I've ever heard anybody address that honestly and expose something that I think really needs to be exposed. I think the victimization of the parents should be addressed. And I think that the churches should stand against that as well. But we don't want to lose sight, definitely, of you, but that does affect everybody in the circle. You're not the only one that was affected by your journey.
And really, it all comes back to the child. If you affect their family, you are affecting the child too, because the family is the first line of defense. They are the protective walls around their child.
Okay, so I was going to save this for later as my kind of backup, but you were in a very powerful documentary, and I just can't recommend it enough. It was with Walt Heyer, who we've interviewed before, a good friend of mine. Talk to us, please, about that documentary, because everybody that's listening or watching this needs to see it.
I'm actually not sure which documentary this is, because I've been in several.
Okay, the new one that just came out about the daughter that committed suicide and the mother, and she was taken away from the mother.
That could be more than one.
Tell me which ones, and I'll tell you which one it is.
I don't recall.
All right.
I think that goes to show how much I've been doing.
You have, but you were featured in it quite a bit. And well, I'll just tell you the premise, and we'll make sure that we get you the link for it. But the story is, it's about a girl who's just curious, and in her school they have a group for people that are struggling, and the school basically sets up this private group, and you don't have to tell your parents or anything. This girl's just kind of inquisitive about it, but then she she's kind of guided through another friend about this trans thing, and the girl identifies as non-binary. The girl is kind of depressed and going through changes, and she's basically sucked into this ideology. She's meeting at this group, after school. Single mother trying to raise, her kids, has no idea that now her daughter is changing clothes when she gets to school, and she's changing her name and going by different pronouns. But at home, the mother knows nothing. And then as it goes through the story, it starts basically showing that the mother's like against it. And when she finds out, she's like, what's going on? And, but the school was basically telling her that she had no rights regarding her daughter, and that to defend the daughter's rights to be transgender, the mother either had to acquiesce and approve, or else she was going to be ostracized and fought against, and eventually is taken out of the home. Still nothing coming to mind?
Is that the Epic Times documentary?
No. We're going to find out. And would you guys do a search, because there's a documentary with and I've done the search and I could find it, but if someone could do that for me, I would appreciate it.
And part of why I actually can't recall which one it was is because this is a story that has repeated itself more than once. I've heard multiple parents. I've spoken to multiple parents who have this exact same story with their own children. That should be alarming enough. My story is not unique. This is something that is happening to not just a few families, but thousands of families across the entire United States. And I've been abroad now. I've been to Australia and New Zealand. I've spoken to many, domestically, I've spoken to many different communities, different colleges, churches, youth groups, and almost everywhere I've been, I've met somebody who has been affected by this in some way or another. This is something that, whether you like it or not, it's already made its way into your community. And we all have a responsibility to fight back, to start the conversation, as difficult as it might be, as much backlash as we might be afraid of. Ultimately, this is about much more than gender. It's more than about men in dresses. This is about an ideology that has overtaken our major institutions, primarily education and healthcare, but it's also affecting our families, our children, and our next few generations, and it is up to us to speak up for them before it is too late.
That was perfect, Chloe, because I found it, and the movie is Gender Transformation, The Untold Story, or The Untold Realities. Do you remember making this documentary?
I do.
Okay, all right, good. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Or, because I've watched it a few times, I could tell you if you want. But it was amazing, and your part in it was really pivotal, I think, to the story.
Yeah, I remember going through this. I mean, there were multiple phases in development, and originally it was going to be a documentary, and eventually they switched to a docudrama form to include an acted out sequence of one of the mothers who was speaking in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this was actually, I believe, the first documentary that I'd ever had been featured in. I was still, I think, 17 or 18 at the time, maybe just freshly 18 at the time of recording this. And
you act like that was so long ago, but I think
I mean, it's really
then.
only been like 2 or 3 years,
right,
but
right.
There's so much that can happen in just a
These
matter
clothes
of a
are
short few
older
years.
than that, okay? But again, it's Gender Transformation, The Untold Realities. Please, it's a must-see, absolutely. I think for any parent, any loved one that has a loved one that's transgender. It's very powerful. Yeah, amazing. Well, I was going to save that, closer to the end, but, the timing was absolutely perfect. So I'm really curious how you ended up getting on testosterone, and you had some pretty quick effects. Did they give you access to the dosage, or did you have any determination in that?
I don't remember the dosage that they started me on or that I was last on either. But it was either way, like these are massively high doses of androgens that they're putting a barely developing 13-year-old girl on. So by the psychologist, I was referred to several endocrinologists, and one of them that I saw, just after an appointment or two, was when she put me on the path of pursuing medical intervention. Excuse me. And it started with the puberty blockers. They put me on about a 3 to 4 monthly weekly injection, or an injection of Lupron every 3 to 4 months to suppress my puberty. And this is a drug that previously has been used not only in late-stage reproductive cancer patients, but also to chemically castrate juvenile sex offenders. It's not an easy drug for the body to be on. And because I was already a few years into
Lupron is
yes.
also given to sex offenders
Yes.
in prison, and now they're giving it to children.
Yes, and they stopped that. They actually have mostly stopped the use of Lupron as a chemical castration drug because they deemed it too cruel for use in that population of sex offenders, and they were using it in children.
But they'll give it to kids.
Yes,
Okay.
and because I was already a few years into puberty by the time that they started me on it, I basically went into an artificially induced childhood onset menopause for a temporary period. So I was experiencing side effects of the drug, like hot flashes, these uncomfortable, like hot, burning sensations, itching, tingling throughout my body. It was not a pleasant drug to be on. But very quickly after that, about a month after my first injection of Lupron, was when I went on my first dosage of the testosterone. And because like it finally like filled up the space of like the lack of sex hormones in my developing body at the time, it helped to soothe some of the symptoms both physically and psychologically. And I felt like a whole new person when I was on it. It was like I had like this massive boost in my confidence. I felt like I was competitive. I felt like I was on top of the world. And because I was being put on a massive dose of male sex hormones, of course, this was going to cause a massive increase in my sex drive, which was very unfortunate for me as an already sexually traumatized young girl.
Wow.
And it unfortunately led to further abuse down the line because of that, because it took away from the protective instincts that what women naturally tend to have around like guarding their bodies and their sexuality. And because of the sharp boost in those feelings alone, I didn't have like any male guidance on how to control it because my endocrinologist and all my doctors who were involved were pretty much all women. They didn't know what it's like. They don't know what it's like to go through male puberty.
You are breaking out things that I don't think have ever been addressed. And from your perspective, Chloe, you know, it's not just somebody making something up. You physically, mentally, spiritually experience all of this at the same time. I've never thought about the fact that if you were sexually traumatized and now you put on this drug that increases your libido, I mean, it's almost like the trauma.
It changes your instincts and changes your behavior in the way that you think.
That's right. That's
right. How sex hormones are so much more involved, or not just involved in the development of the primary and secondary sex characteristics and of the appearance. It affects the way that you think on a fundamental level.
Right. Wow. And how long were you on the hormones?
I was on the blockers for probably about a year to maybe a year and a half. And I was on the hormones for a total of, I think, like 3 years and 2 to 4 months. And the physical changes from the hormones were very quick. My voice dropped probably within like the next like 2 to 3 weeks after my first injection. And I was taking these weekly. And I mean, the way that I sound and look now does not do justice to how boyish my face and body were and how deep my voice was then. Like I had a deeper voice than pretty much all of my classmates, and even like some like the adult males in my life, like my uncles or like my male teachers or staff at school. It was kind of impressive, actually.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, how quickly the change in my voice happened and how deep it just was. There were actually like quite a few girls who had a crush on me because I just looked like a regular old teenage boy, except I probably grew myself better because I was raised a girl. That's one thing about male spaces. So I integrated very well into male social spaces because I looked like a boy, I sound like a boy, and other than like kids who went to elementary school with me, nobody knew in my high school that I actually was a girl. So I was using like male locker rooms and male restrooms. That was not a fun experience.
Talk about that, because that was really funny.
It gets, I don't know, if you guys have never been, if you've never had the pleasure of entering a high school boys' bathroom, consider yourself very lucky. It's not nice in there. I can't believe I thought I was one of you guys. Like, I much prefer being a woman.
Yeah, okay,
It's
great.
nice.
We prefer you as a woman, too.
Thank you.
And you know something, Chloe? It's interesting because the first time that whenever I see a detransitioner person, you know, I look at them and I try to, in my own mind, you know, coming from the beauty industry, you know, to look at somebody and their features and to see, and, you know, I could tell that you had been masculinized, but you're really a very attractive woman on your own. And, you know, I don't know if that's, you know, the undoing of some of the male hormones.
Yes, I mean, I'm very lucky that I was able to refeminize both in my voice and my appearance after going off of it. I mean, most of the effects of it are supposed to be permanent or semi-permanent, and some of it has been, especially because I was taking at a time where I was still developing.
Right. So talk to us now about this whole deception where these medical doctors are saying that the hormones just put a pause on puberty.
There is this major misconception, even amongst like conservatives and like legislators in red states, that the puberty blockers are okay and permissible for use in children who are gender dysphoric because they are reversible completely, and they just create a pause button for puberty to allow a child some time to think about which path they would rather take, whether they go through their natural healthy puberty or they want to pursue trying to mimic the opposite sex. I mean, the very premise of it is ridiculous. You can't stop a natural bodily process and not expect there to be any consequences, especially when you're stopping the only process through which that a child can become an adult in every single way, to fully develop physically, emotionally, socially, and especially reproductively. I mean, there's no guarantee that puberty is going to start back up or even resume just normally after stopping the usage of the puberty blockers. And it really is the beginning of the pipeline. The moment that you affirm this idea for the child in any way, whether you affirm their preferred pronouns or name, or you start them on the puberty blockers, it's basically sending them one way into the direction of transitioning. Historically, children have tended to desist out of their transgender identity and out of any feelings of distress that they have around their sex and their bodies by the time that they're 18 and they're done with puberty. But when you start them on puberty blockers, you're basically guaranteeing them to transitioning medically.
So it really is a lie when a doctor says that we're just going to put a pause on puberty and, you know, allow the child to experience the hormones, and if they decide they don't want it, they can go back, right?
You can't. There is no going back. Right. I mean, you can go back to your identity as your birth sex and choose to go off of the interventions, but the changes are permanent. The changes are completely permanent.
There's a story of a young boy, and I think he's from Australia, and he was 8 years old, told his mother he was a girl. Mother took her son to a psychologist. They said, your son has gender dysphoria. They put him on hormones. Single mother, not knowing anything else, agreed with the science. By the time he was 14 years old, he had female breasts that had naturally developed. His voice did not lower and change. His face became more feminine after he'd been on the hormones for so long. But at 14, he went to his mother and he said, "I'm not a girl, I'm a boy." And so the mother, of course, stopped the hormone treatment, but now he has these breasts that have to be removed surgically, and he has to go to a voice coach to learn how to speak more manly, and all because we allow children to, to decide what sex they want to be. But again, it affirms what you're saying, is that the hormones change the body. They don't put a pause on anything. Wow.
There is no pausing puberty. And I mean, this is directly interfering with the development of children into healthy adults who have their bodies, and their right to reproduce and have healthy lives ripped away from them.
Absolutely, ripped away from them, right? I would have been that child. I would have been first in line at 6, to get the hormones. At 14 years old, I'd have had the sex change. I was completely convinced that I would not be happy unless I was female. It was during a very repressive time, in history, where that would have been, a huge negative thing or whatever. But I remember growing my hair to my shoulders, and I remember being complimented if someone thought I was my sister.
Right. You mentioned that it's repressive, but it's often so. A lot of proponents of this ideology and of this treatment of children claim that it is something that is a net good for both sexes because it defies gender roles. But if anything, you'll notice that these children and these men and women who have these feelings, they come from places or families with very repressive ideals, very small boxes and ideas of what men and women should be like. And this ideology around gender is the very same. It's very repressive. It's basically encouraging children and adults who feel like they are too effeminate as men or too masculine as women to try and change a fundamental part of who they are because of the things that simply make them unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Chloe. It wasn't until I was 20 years old, I would have had the surgery right up until that part. And as a Christian, I thought to myself, wait, so the answer to God is like, if I have same-sex attraction, if I have a sex change, then everything would be okay, right? Then my attractions would be okay and God would be okay with that. But at 20 years old, when I just pushed God away and I said, done with that, and then I went into the gay culture, what I realized, the problem wasn't that I wanted to be a female. The problem was I felt inadequate as a male. And then going into the gay culture, masculinity is much more valuable than femininity. So my problem was, if I wanted attention from men, then I had to act more masculine. So if I started working out in the gym, changing the way I acted or walked or talked or whatever, I found that I got all the attention from men that I wanted. And the idea of being a female completely went away, and I never had that desire again. But it took until I was 20 years old before that would have happened. Would I naturally have matured into that process where I would have been okay with my gender, or was there something to it that I needed to understand, or that I just needed to be loved by men, and that was really the driving force of why I wanted to change my sex?
And these feelings of discomfort around one's sex and around one's body are a lot more common than we give credit for, actually. I mean, people have experienced these feelings for a very long time in our history, but we've only recently started to medicalize it, when really it's a natural particularly around puberty, but even in early adulthood, and for some even into middle or late adulthood, to have that sort of discomfort because of all the change and all the social pressure that come with being of either sex. But just because you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that you have to change.
Oh, I love this point.
And that discomfort is something that I think is valuable as well. Discomfort is just an innate part of the human experience. And without it, we wouldn't have any personal growth. We wouldn't be able to grow from boys into men or from girls into women without these struggles that we experience on a daily basis.
Powerful. Wow. Absolutely amazing. I'm just at the tip of the iceberg of all the questions that I have in my mind for you. I love the exchange. I really do. You're an amazing person to interview. I want to talk a little bit more about your own personal journey. At 14, a drastic decision was made, and I saw a video clip of the nurse that was in the operating room that you said, and that really got me. I share that a lot with where I go. Do you remember that clip?
I don't recall.
The look on their face as you were about to go into surgery.
Yes.
Okay.
So around the time that I was 14, I think maybe just after my freshman year of high school, I started having consultations for future surgery. And it wasn't until I was 15. And still, I was this was before I was old enough to legally drive, that I went under the knife for the first and for the only time during this period of my life. And that was to undergo a radical double mastectomy, or the removal of my breasts. And I think it's very apparent how inappropriate it is for a doctor to be performing such a surgery on someone so young and someone who, though mentally unwell, was perfectly physically healthy. It was not an easy thing for me to go through. And for the first time in my transition, I began to feel grief. I began to feel regret, but I didn't know how to put a name to that feeling, because every single doctor who I had, who put me down this path, they had never spoken about regret. They had never spoken.
Brought up.
No, regret was never spoken about, ever, and neither was detransition. I didn't know that it was a possibility. Now, you bring up what happens in the operating room.
Right.
I very clearly remember the day of my surgery, actually. I remember Mom and Dad driving me to San Francisco, to the hospital, and I was very nervous. I was excited. I didn't yet feel any sort of ill feelings toward my transition or towards this intervention, but I was just distracting myself with music. And eventually, it just all flew by so quickly that morning. They rolled me into the operating room. I was so nervous. And I was just like babbling my surgeons and my nurses' ears off, like just introducing myself, saying like, "Hi, I'm Leo. I'm 15 years old, and I'm a transgender boy. I'm currently attending high school. I hope that I get to graduate early and maybe do something else." And as I was talking to these doctors, I really strongly recall looking in the back of the room and seeing this young male nurse who was helping to prepare the instruments. And I couldn't really read the look on his face. He was just furrowing his eyebrows at me and looking at me almost as if he was disgusted. It was this look of shock and discontentment on his face. And I think, like, retrospectively, I now realize that was the face of, is that a child that I'm about to do this to?
Right, wow.
What have I gotten myself into? How have I gotten myself to this point? How has that kid gotten to this point? And I remember that being one of the very last things that I saw before I went under. And the post-op process was not easy for me to go through at all. It was actually an outpatient surgery, so like pretty much as soon as I woke up, they just sent me right home.
Like a drive-through window?
Yeah, it was like going through McDonald's. But I remember I actually woke up a few times because the anesthesia hadn't yet worn off. And I remember like really like trying to like force myself awake, trying to force myself out of the hospital bed. And they're like, no, lay down, and putting me back to sleep. And then when I finally woke up, like I went to the restroom and we were pretty much good to go back home. And that first 2 weeks back home, I mean, I was basically disabled. I was disabled for like a good few months. Like I couldn't lift weights or like even like
raise
lift
your
my
hands?
raise my
That's
hands above my head to like the 2-3 month mark. But those first few days, they sucked because I was basically like bedridden and just like confined to like doing very basic activities, just like playing video games all day and having mom and dad like help me. Mostly my mom, actually. She was taking time off work to help me with this, having her help me with like getting around and like doing like household chores and stuff. And I found like having to like be stuck inside the house all day was very isolating. So psychologically, I was already not in a great spot. And then this is also like in the middle of the massive quarantines that California was doing during COVID. That's also another part of this, slightly unrelated, but I went surgery during that point in time when they were still like denying people of going through surgeries that were determined elective, right? Even if they would greatly increase like a patient's quality of life. And yet I had this completely elective cosmetic surgery that took healthy tissue out of my body during a time when they were barring patients who really needed it. And I started to realize over time, and very quickly, within like maybe even like a few weeks to a few months afterward, like I missed having a more feminine form. I missed that feeling of being pretty and being able to put on makeup and dress myself up without judgment. Because if I tried to do that now as a guy, well, people were going to call me all sorts of names at school.
Wow, that's soon. That's soon after your surgery.
Yes, that's soon.
Wow.
And I just started to feel more and more distance from myself and my surroundings. And I was in a very depressed state. And I thought that this was just a consequence of the post-op process. You know, I mean, physically it wasn't easy. Like I would have to like take care of the skin grafts that they took of my skin in that area. I was gonna have to like massage like my scars and everything and like look down like the surgical markings. I felt like a Frankenstein monster sometimes, but I thought, well, eventually those feelings of sadness are just gonna go away and I'm gonna be fully healed, and one day I'm gonna be able to take my shirt off and just like run around the beach without a shirt on, just like my big brothers. I had this very detailed fantasy about just like being on the beach with like a bunch of guys and just like playing around, playing football with them. That was my idea of masculinity.
Yeah, but
it was very childlike.
What a conflict in your mind, because you're regretting the part about feeling pretty and yet looking forward to the type when you can run around without a shirt like your brothers. I mean, there was quite a conflict going on inside your mind as well.
Right. There was like a major dichotomy in my mind because I had such strict ideas of what either being male or being female would look like. But I was so confused during that time. And even though like I was slightly, it was mostly my subconscious that I felt these feelings of sadness. But I started to consciously realize like, I want to wear skirts again. I want to wear dresses again. I want to grow my hair out and be called cute and pretty and all these things. And I hadn't even had a boyfriend before by this point in time. And I really just wanted a strong man in my life who would take care of me and fill like a feminine role in a romantic relationship and eventually a marriage. About a year after my surgery, less than a year actually, 11 months into the healing process. I was 16 years old now. I was at the end of my junior year of high school and I was beginning to study psychology. And one day I just had this epiphany, many epiphanies actually, that now I was 2 years away from legal adulthood. I would have to start thinking about what the future of my life is going to look like with things like, not only like going, whether I want to pursue secondary, or I guess it would be tertiary education, like college or university, but also about my relationships. Do I want to get married one day? Do I want to give my mom and dad grandchildren?
Wow.
And if I do, how am I going to explain this transgender identity to my children? What are they going to call me? Are they going to call me mom or dad? And I mean, how am I going to fit into that role in a healthy way for them? I recently had learned about the importance of breastfeeding and maternal affection in the bond between mother and child. And it blew my mind because I knew nothing about that. I didn't know that part of me could be so powerful.
Wow.
And I didn't know that I valued being a mother so much up until that point. And it was then that I realized I just had something taken away not only from me, but also my future children.
That's right.
And I'm never going to be able to breastfeed my children. I'm never going to have that. I'm never going to even know what that's like. And I broke down in tears, and I couldn't function for a few weeks after this. It was very shortly after that I detransitioned. And I wasn't even necessarily calling myself a woman yet. I just knew that I couldn't go any further into this process because it was destroying me. And even though I was still a child, it was taking away parts of my adulthood. I knew I couldn't go on. I didn't want to see what was to come if I were to go on.
Wow. All right. So Chloe, what was the reaction when you started to detransition and when you made that decision publicly or even to your family? How did your family first respond?
Well, nobody pushed back. Nobody in my family pushed back against my detransition. I think mom saw it coming, and both my mom and dad, they felt a lot of grief and guilt because they knew they had a hand in this, and they hated me. They hated to see me in the state that I was. Mm-hmm. And I hated to have them see me in that state too. I couldn't even bring myself to cry in front of them as much as I did. I cried like daily, even hourly during that point in my life. And I never showed my face to my mom and dad when I did because I didn't want them to feel as horrible as they did. But at the same time, like it was like a big breath of relief for mom and dad, and especially for my older brothers who were very concerned about me as I went through this. Mm-hmm. They all were scared that they would never have that bubbly little fashionista in their life ever again. Oh. And to see me come back slowly but surely.
I wish you had a picture. That would be so cute.
I have plenty of pictures. Right. I don't know if I'd be able to send them in time to project them onto the screen. But I was a cute kid. I was a cute little kid.
Wait, you still are.
Well, I'm not quite little anymore. I'm not quite a kid, but I'd like to hope that I'm still cute. I'd like to hope so.
Absolutely adorable.
Thank you. And when it came to my friends and my doctors, the reaction was actually very different. Mm-hmm. So I went to all of my doctors who were involved with the transition process for help, obviously because they had gotten me into the situation in the first place. None. I couldn't get any help. I went back to the woman who referred me to the surgeon. And it was almost as if she was trying to keep me in the mindset of being transgender. She would say things like, well, perhaps you're non-binary, maybe you haven't stopped transition. Maybe this is just another form of transition for you. It's just another part of your gender journey. She would repeat, I hate that phrase so much. The amount of times that I heard that repeated, I was not happy about that. I gave her an earful about that.
What was the term?
Gender journey.
Wow.
This magical little rainbow and unicorns journey of gender, right? Where you get parts of your body lopped off.
Ironic how you made that so simple.
I mean, that's really how infantile it sounds. To just reduce it to a journey rather than an incredibly traumatic experience that I shouldn't have been through.
Right.
That no child should go through. I went back to my surgeon for complications that I was having with the skin grafts, and he actually gave me advice that gave me a skin infection. So that was like the final straw for me. I haven't really regularly gone back to any doctor since because, I mean, just this whole experience has been just incredibly frustrating for me, and I've found it really difficult to recuperate that trust in the people who should be taking care of me and taking care of my health. And even my endocrinologist, like, I tried to, like, ask her, like, okay, like, what can I expect for my health in the future? How do I go off of hormones? How do I stop taking the injections?
Right, because you can't just stop, right?
I went off cold turkey.
You did.
Part of it was, like, I didn't want to ever look at the needle ever again. But also, I didn't know how to stop. I had no guidance. There was just nothing for me when I turned to the people who once put me on this one-way path. And when it came to the transgender community, oh, they hated me. They hated me for talking about the grief and the regret, and even just the fact that I was stopping. They absolutely hated my guts. They told me that it was my fault. They told me I should have known better, that I should just shut up about my experience because it was all just about me and nobody else would ever have gone through this, and I might be scaring people out of getting the life-saving care that they need, right? That I stole resources in the transgender community because I was unnecessarily medicalized. All the blame was shifted onto me. And at school, it's kind of funny, actually. I was talking about this in the car last night. It was not an easy experience because most of my friends and most of my peers and classmates had known me as a young man. So to see me come back, it was like, wait, who are you? Like they thought that I was a boy who was trying to become a girl. They thought I was a transgender woman.
That's hysterical.
So I got a lot of weird looks during this time, and I was very ashamed of myself. This is when like they were still like having kids wear masks over their face. And I hate to say it, but I found that kind of comforting because it made me feel like I could just like hide all the masculinized features of my face and like maybe not be recognized. As like I went to the women's restrooms and locker rooms, and I actually lost my friend group at school, partly because of ideological changes after I detransitioned. Because after I stopped transitioning, I started questioning everything. I started questioning everything that I had previously known, and many of them were not happy about my changed stance on transgenderism, even though I was the only transgender individual in the group. They were like, oh, well, that makes you transphobic. I think that anybody should be allowed to transition. Just because you had a bad experience doesn't mean that other people shouldn't be allowed to partake in it. And I also was like, I don't think I entirely blame them for cutting me off the way that they did. It was during a very rough point in my life, and on one hand, I lost the support and the peer group that I really needed at such a terrible time in my life, but they also wouldn't have been prepared to deal with me during that time because I was so depressed. It wasn't on them as kids to help take care of me. It was the responsibility of the adults who had failed me. So, I mean, my life was just a wreck after I chose to stop, both medically and socially. Like, I didn't know if I was ever going to live a normal life ever again. I thought everything was just over for me, and I didn't think I was even going to make it to 18. And here I am. I mean, so I didn't know what was keeping me going on, but for some reason, I just had this sense that one day I'd get better. One day I would have a future to look forward to. I'd find new friends. I would find my niche. And maybe one day I'd have a family of my own. And I soon discovered that there was an entire community of people who were just like me, who had been through the same experiences, many of them as adults and many of them as children. They understood. They knew the pain. And I could look up to the older members of this community of other detransitioners to know that I could move forward with my life, that I could heal in more ways than one. But I also felt this fear and this responsibility in knowing that I wasn't alone, that there are thousands of other people out there who are just like me.
That's right.
And that is a big part of what motivates me to speak up now, because I've seen not only what me and my family have gone through, but what all of these other kids and young men and women have as well.
Yeah, powerful.
And frankly, I want to live in a world where I can see my little nieces and nephews and my own future children and grandchildren grow up without having to worry about them being ripped away from me, having a relationship ruined by a tyrannical government or by medical professionals, or to see their natural, healthy, beautiful development into adulthood be stunted.
That's really powerful. I've never heard anything so detailed and explained so well, Chloe. I think where I want to head now, if you don't mind, is how does God fit into your life now, and how did all of that transpire?
I appreciate that you asked that, because I mean, well, my mom, she's a Filipino immigrant, and she came from a Catholic background. And my dad was raised in a Mormon household, and they actually, I don't know about the entire extent of their own religious journeys. They are currently agnostic and atheist, but they actually came together, and they went to church with me and the whole family up until I was about 4 to 5 years old. I don't really know exactly what changed then. I mean, that was roughly around the time of the recession, so I don't know if it has anything to do with that. But because of that, I didn't really grow up with those ideals. I didn't really grow up with that foundation of faith in my life. I didn't understand why I was born a girl, why the circumstances in my life were the way that they were, or myself, or my identity. And I feel like that is in large part what created that rift in my understanding and my struggles with myself. So I went years just struggling to understand. I was a highly curious girl. I was very scientifically minded, but I always felt like there was something that was just missing. And I wouldn't entirely say that I was just atheist. I was more agnostic. I believed that there is the possibility of a God being out there, because you look at humanity, and there's just no way that we are the most perfect, the most intelligent beings out there. Other animals have senses that we don't. So what can't we see? What is it that we cannot see and achieve? I wondered this for years. And as I was going through my transition, especially in the later stages, I started to have this feeling of fear, of fearing a being above, if there was one. I didn't know for sure then, but I thought, if there is a God watching, he must hate me. He must have created me to suffer. That must be the only reason why I exist, and I don't understand why. But I hate being here on this earth. I didn't want to have my life anymore. I didn't want to have anything. My detransition was not something that came about for religious reasons. At least, I didn't think so at the time. But as I began to speak out, I started to connect with a lot of Christians and people of faith. And slowly but surely, my previous ideals and my previous beliefs were challenged, were put away, and were changed anew. And I realized that I was called to speak. I didn't know why. I didn't even know why I had survived through the process of transitioning and then stopping. But I realized I was called by a higher power. And I realized that no matter what I had gone through, no matter what I'm going to go through in the future or what I'm going through in the present, whether it's good or bad, painful or joyful, it's all for a purpose. Every single experience is God guiding me. And as long as I listen, it all will strengthen me. It's not going to be easy. But in doing anything important, and especially in following the word and guidance of God, those difficulties are for a reason.
Wow. Chloe, there's no doubt in my mind that you are definitely anointed for what you do, and it's clear. And I love that. I love that even through the pain, and I hope you've heard that in all of our stories, all of our journeys of how God has gone to great lengths to reach us. And what I find profound is that no matter what we have gone through, and everyone's journey is completely different, But you know what? God's intention to get our hearts and to win us in spite of what the enemy really dealt for us,
Amen.
I think is really beautiful. I have this quote I just want to share with you, and it's really been empowering to me because I could never relate to God as loving or kind or even, generous. But I have this one quote I want to share with you if you don't mind. It's from a book called Education, and it was written by a woman with a third grade education. And it was about 100 years ago that she wrote this. She said, "The divine teacher bears with the erring through all their perversity. His love does not grow cold. His efforts to win us do not cease. With outstretched arms, he waits to welcome again and again the erring, the rebellious, and even the apostate. His heart is touched with the helplessness of that little child who is subject to rough usage. The cry of human suffering never reaches his ear in vain. Even though all of us are precious in his sight, the rough, the sullen, and the stubborn dispositions draw most heavily upon his sympathy and love because he traces from cause to effect. The one who is most easily tempted and most inclined to err is a special object of his attention." I'd like to know if we as a church could just lift up a blessing for you. Would you mind that? Because you go everywhere so often, and I hunt you down and I watch you like a hawk. But, as somebody who travels a lot too, there are times when you're lonely. There are times when you're tired. There's times when you're attacked. Many times that you're misunderstood. And could we just offer a blessing to you? Would you mind?
I appreciate that. Thank
Would you like to come up, and could we just give a blessing to Chloe? Has this been empowering for anyone? I've been mesmerized. Honestly, Chloe, I just sit here and I stare at you and I go, every word that comes out of your mouth is absolutely truth and power and things that I wish that I could share.
And I just think she's a weapon. I mess with the wrong person.
Weapon. She's a weapon. That's right. That's right. All right. I'm going to put this down. Can we just place our hand? Is that okay? All right. All right. I wish you could see what's behind you. Take a look. Take a look. A lot of love. Let's pray. Father in heaven, you are so good. And Lord, Chloe is precious. And I think of that little precious girl, Lord, and how she was deceived and how she was manipulated, Lord, by not only the internet, but medical professionals, Lord, who know better. And Lord, unfortunately, they will be held accountable. And I pray that like that nurse in that operating room, Lord, that they will be convicted, that they will turn away from the hideous things that they're creating, these mutilating surgeries that they're performing on precious children that are perfectly fine and whole, Lord, if they were just allowed to develop and to mature. And Father, Chloe was one of those victims, and you traced from cause to effect, you saw everything that was happening in her life, and it mattered to you. And you stood back and you allowed the situation to unfold the way that it did. Because, Lord, you knew that you were going to bring it around. And that you were going to lift her up and you were going to anoint her and you were going to help her, Lord, to help many other young girls and young men, Lord, to be able to turn away from this hideous science experiment, Lord. And I just pray, Lord, that you would encourage her and that when those times come where she's under attack or when she is feeling lonely or wonders, what am I doing here? That I pray, Father, that you would reach down and that you would feel your warmth and your embrace. And that, Lord, that you would encourage her and that you would give her the energy that she needs, Lord, to just keep going one more day because she's helping people like me.
Amen.
So, Lord, for those parents that are out there and for those young people, even those people that despise her, because one day, Lord, they may hear something that she says. And with your Spirit, Lord, that's the way it's going to get out. And let it burn like a fire, not just in our country, but around the world. Let her voice, Lord, echo the power not only of a loving Savior, but also of the horribleness of what the medical community has done to her and to many others. Bless our dear friend Chloe is my prayer, Lord, as she continues to move from us and until we're safely in your arms, Lord, in heaven. And again, Lord, I can only say hallelujah. Amen. That you said that when you come, that we are changed in the twinkling of an eye. And whatever had happened to us, whatever we've done to our bodies, whatever that was, Lord, you'll put it back. You'll put us back the way we were meant to be. And that we'll live throughout eternity, Lord, giving you praise and the only scars in heaven will be the scars on your hands, Lord, because you suffered and bled and died for us. So, Lord, let us praise you from now until the moment we see you face to face. And we lift up our dear friend, our sister, Lord, to you, little Chloe Cole, and her brother, who also travels with her. And we thank you, Lord, and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Precious, you are precious. Thank you.